The Answer.
Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. And President Trump at the UN this week delivered perhaps the greatest reality check on behalf of Western civilization that's ever been delivered by an American president to the UN. Truly. I mean, in a very secular sense, talking about things like immigration policy and energy policy and saying things like this.
Climate change, it's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. Climate change, no matter what happens, you're involved in that. No more global warming, no more global cooling. All of these predictions made by the United Nations and many others, often for bad reasons, were wrong. They were made by stupid people that have cost their countries fortunes and given those same countries no chance for success. If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail. And I'm really good at predicting things, you know. They actually said during the campaign they had a hat, the best-selling hat. Trump was right about everything. And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything. And I'm telling you that if you don't get away from the green energy scam, your country is going to fail. And if you don't stop people that you've never seen before, that you have nothing in common with, your country is going to fail. I'm the president of the United States, but I worry about Europe.
Yeah, I don't know that he's been right about everything. I wouldn't go that far, but he's right about this. And I wish he would have added a line that Bjorn Lomborg, our forthcoming guest, an argument that he makes all the time, which is you're enriching the rich at the expense of the poor with these policies. It's not that climate change doesn't occur naturally. Of course it does. The climate is changing. The globe, this mortal coil in which we live, is always changing. It's the policy response. And the policy response is to enrich yourselves, people in this room, and their circles of friends at the expense of your constituents. Something else Chris Wright said, the energy secretary this week, too, I thought was particularly notable in the sense of rejecting this aphorism, this political aphorism that is often bandied about.
The wind subsidies and solar subsidies are 33 years old, so it's about time for industries to walk on their own. We do have studies and dialogues going on right now with the offshore wind developers. No final decisions have been made on that. There are serious issues on both sides there. And I'll say as a lifelong energy guy, I've never been an all of the above energy person. I've always said I'm for affordable, reliable, secure energy that betters human lives. Mm-hmm. So if you do things to your energy system that make it more expensive and less reliable, I'm not for that.
Yeah, not all of the above to satisfy all camps. I'm for what makes sense. I'm for what achieves these objectives. Affordable, reliable, improves the quality of life for the people for whom I can improve the quality of life. And he's a former energy exec, of course, energy company exec. For more on this, pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Bjorn Lomborg, president of Copenhagen Consensus think tank, author of Best Things First. Bjorn, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dan, good to be here.
President Trump may not exactly use the vernacular you would use, but he was directionally correct, as he often is.
Yeah. I mean, look, whatever you think of Trump's rhetoric, he's absolutely right in pointing out that green policies cost us a fortune and unfortunately delivers very little. And so when you have, I mean, look, global warming or climate change or whatever you want to call it is a real problem, but it's a problem. It's not the end of the world. And the way that we're trying to fix it costs us pretty much the world. And that's a bad deal. So we need to get better at this. And he's absolutely right to point to Europe. And he could also point at Canada, Australia, a few other rich countries who are just spending enormous sums and achieving almost nothing. Last year, the world spent more than $2 trillion on climate policies. And yet the impact is virtually unnoticeable. It's likely that we won't be able to measure the difference even by the end of this century. That's a terrible way to spend trillions of dollars.
Right. It's not just that it's having no positive impact. It's the opportunity cost of all those resources frivolously wasted. Exactly.
And one of the things that you also pointed out, and that I wrote in my New York Post op-ed, was really, look, the UN is meeting this week here in New York, where they're talking about all the different problems of the world. Most people on the planet suffer from easily curable infectious diseases. They have lack of food. They have lack of good education. There are lots of problems in this world. And many of these things we could save and fix for billions of dollars. But instead, we're saying, oh, no, let's just focus on climate and spend trillions of dollars and not actually achieve anything. And that's really, really terrible. That's what you just pointed out, the opportunity cost, that we end up spending money really badly, so we forget to spend them well, much less money on actually fixing problems.
And again, just in terms of the balance sheet here, as you heard Energy Secretary Chris Wright talk about, 33 years of renewable energy subsidies, and where are we at?
Well, we're at a place where Europe has almost 3 times the cost of electricity as do the U.S. and even more compared to China. We have a situation where the more solar and wind you have in your energy system, not the cheaper electricity cost, but actually the higher electricity costs. So we only have good data for the world for up till 2023. But if you take the almost 70 countries that we have, if you plot them along the horizontal line of how much solar and wind are in their system, and then up the y-axis, how costly is it? It's not such that if you have lots of solar and wind, it's really cheap. It's really, really expensive. There are only expensive solutions out there. So all the cheap electricity solutions are down where you have very little solar and wind. All the expensive ones are high up. And that tells you something. That tells you that the world is not agreeing with this standard mantra, oh, solar and wind is incredibly cheap. That may be possibly true when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, but when it's not, and remember, most people like their electricity 24/7, not just when the weather allows it. If you need energy 24/7, you need backup power for almost your entire energy system, and that ends up making the total energy system much, much costlier than had you just gone with fossil fuels. Now, eventually, I would love to see a world where we can do without the CO2 emissions, absolutely, but this world is not yet there. And so we really need to be careful. What we're trying to do is not only make Europe's energy prices go up, but we're also trying to force all the poor countries to do the same mistake. That is to what they call leapfrog from having no electricity to just having unreliable and very expensive electricity. And that's a terrible outcome.
So a day after Trump called climate change a con job, of course, here comes Chinese communist dictator President Xi to make the statement, green and low carbon transition is the trend of our time. While some countries are acting against it, the international community should stay focused in the right direction, says a guy who is rolling out dozens and dozens of coal-fired plants, energy plants every year. Anyway, what's Xi doing there in your estimation?
Well, I mean, first of all, he is selling solar and wind. China produces almost all the solar and wind and electric cars in the world. So obviously he wants everyone else to be on board. Remember, Chinese solar companies probably have an overproduction of more than 50%, more likely 60 or 70%. They basically tried to fire a lot of people, and they still have way overproduction quantities. So he wants to sell more of this stuff. Also, remember, China is a huge country. So yes, China builds a lot of solar and wind, and they don't all not work, as Trump pointed out. They do work, but China is still almost entirely a fossil fuel powered country. So they at the lowest. They had 7.5% of their energy from renewables, and now they're all the way up to almost 11%. So let's just remember, most of China is still coal-fired, and not surprisingly, that is what brought almost all of them out of poverty. And most of the rest of the world, so India and Africa and Latin America, they're not looking at Germany or UK and saying, gee, we'd love to have incredibly expensive power and deindustrialization. They look at China and say, we'd love to get lots of cheap energy and get rich. And you can't blame them.
Yeah, I mean, 4 or 5 centuries, China is going to be completely renewable energy based, I'm sure, at the pace they're going now.
But
the other thing about it, I mean, there's more cynical political play there too. Is not just China wants to enrich itself; it would rather keep the rest of the world dependent on China for their, their shiny objects, the solar and wind devices, while it stays strong based on fossil fuels. I mean, that's the whole point, is have these countries do to themselves what the Chinese Communist Party can't do to them directly, and that starts with America.
Oh, I'm sure they are very delighted that we are also intentionally undermining ourselves and making our industries less competitive, and hence, ceding even more space to the Chinese. So yes, that is also an added-on benefit. But I really think China is just, they found their great niche, and their niche is producing lots of green stuff. So obviously they want us all to want more of that. But unfortunately, since it's not cheaper, you actually have to get politicians to demand it.
And in terms of what Trump said, too, about, the predictions having almost always been wrong or off by, at least one standard deviation. I mean, that is the case in terms of the climate modeling that we're supposed to spend trillions of dollars on the basis of.
So I think you have to distinguish between, the serious science, which is actually what the UN climate panel has been telling us about, has been pretty correct. And they have basically been telling us, yeah, there's a problem, and this is something we should be looking into. But the science that you hear about, the one that makes the headlines in New York Times and everywhere else, are the things that they have been spectacularly wrong about, where they tell you, oh my God, all the coral reefs are gone, and there's
polar
an immense
bears
amount of heat waves or polar bears and all these things. And of course, remember, the Great Barrier Reef has never been better than it is in the 2020s. Yes, there are more heat waves, but there are many fewer cold waves, and actually more people don't die because of heat and cold. And of course, polar bears are at an all-time high. Again, none of this has anything to do with the fact that there's nothing true about the climate predictions,
right.
But it is that climate is just not the main factor in this. The reason why we have more polar bears is simply we've stopped shooting so many of them, which is actually, if you ask me, a good thing. We should, but we're still,
if you stop shooting,
polar bears.
if you stop shooting them, they're more likely to survive. Yeah, right.
Exactly, and there are 25,000 polar bears roughly in the world, and we still shoot 700 each year. If you worry about climate change, if you worry about the future of polar bears, maybe the first thing to do is not to change the entire engine of global prosperity for the last 200 years and rip it out and say, let's try something else. But maybe you just I don't know, stop shooting them.
And so, I mean, that's an important distinction to make. So you have to look at sort of the science and the hyperbolized science or politicized science that is intended to advance this idea of signing on to net zero by 2050 versus modeling that is just trying to describe what is and prompt a conversation about what to do about what is.
Yeah, and look, all you hear is all these scary stories, and they're obviously designed to say, if you think the end of the world is approaching, and remember, a lot of young people have been brought up to believe that climate change is the end of the world, and also a lot of adults believe this because you constantly hear about one terrible thing after another in the news. I understand that. And of course, it's intentional in the sense that makes you sign on to really, really expensive policies like net zero. But the reality is climate change is a problem. Climate economics, even the only guy to win the Nobel Prize in climate economics, estimate this will cost us by the end of the century 2 to 3% of GDP. Yeah, that's a real problem. It's not the end of the world. It's not anywhere near 100%. So it's a problem. But if you try to make policies that don't really fix all that much, that cost 5, 10, 20% of GDP to fix a 2 to 3% problem, that's a really bad deal. And unfortunately, that's the deal that we're being sold right now.
Bjorn Lomborg is president of the Copenhagen Consensus think tank. He's also the author of Best Things First. Bjorn Lomborg, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Great to talk to you.
You too, and Bjorn Lomborg joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank. It's a bank that cares about your business and is invested in your success. I'm Dan Proft, and I know this because Signature Bank is my business bank.
Hi, I'm Chris Johnson, CEO of Classic Cinemas and proud customer of